Okay, so as I say, you're very welcome to this mentor training. This is a cross-phase training, so primary and secondary. I'll just introduce myself. My name's Elaine Guzdick and I work with Trinity Institute of Education. I oversee all the primary trainees, obviously with Katie, and I also work cross-phase, so into some secondary. Katie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks very much, Elaine. Afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. We know what a busy time of year it is, so it's really lovely to have you with us today. My name's Katie Ayres. I'm the ITT leader for Calderdale and Kirklees Teaching School, and I lead on both primary and secondary, link tutor for many of the trainees that we've got placed across the geographical area, and looking forward very much to working with many of you this academic year. Thanks, Elaine.
Okay, thanks, Katie. Okay, so obviously just to touch base on some of the basics, we'll agree that obviously there is no universally agreed definition for mentoring. There are obviously many different mentoring and coaching models out there, frameworks and different approaches, and we often see a hybrid of the two. But many models have shared components such as identifying and development areas and providing feedback. But we do know that strong mentoring plays a key role in the retention of new teachers, and well-structured training for mentors also increases the impact on trainees. So on the screen, you'll just see an overview of the kind of the roles of within your school, the managing mentor and the mentor itself. So in terms of managing mentor, so if you are a managing mentor, you might well be both if you are in primary perhaps. It's about that overseeing that weekly meetings are factored in. So they could be timetabled. We do appreciate that on a week-to-week basis that it may not stick to the same time. It could be at a time that's most convenient for all parties involved. The managing mentor, obviously, to support the mentor in that formal report writing, which comes at the end of a placement. And obviously to QA some reports. We all like somebody to work with, a buddy to support us, and obviously that role will facilitate that. Managing mentor may, again, offer those coaching opportunities, CPD perhaps for the trainees and or the mentors. You know, you might well have a mentor in school who's new to the role and might need a little bit of TLC, obviously taken, showing the ropes, and obviously to get them on track. So offering those opportunities themselves. The mentor then obviously will support the induction period, and that's primarily through direction. The induction period is what your trainee is in currently. So it's about finding the feet, establishing roles within school, finding out about the day-to-day life of school. We're going to look at that in a few slides later. The mentor will also meet with the trainee weekly if they're full-time, or fortnightly if they're part-time trainees. And we would urge that to kind of ideally start as soon as possible, just so that everybody's kind of getting into the way of it, knows what their kind of the roles are and what a meeting might look like on a weekly basis. We ask that mentors and again other practitioners carry out observations, both informal, so it could be ad hoc observations. In the moment, your trainee might be leading small groups at the minute, they might be leading different parts of lessons, you know, as the confidence starts to build. And that formal observation, so that will take place once per week after October half term, and once per 2 weeks if it's a part-time trainee. Now, we always say that it's at the discretion of the school, because we well know that some of the trainees have come from a long list of background experience already. Some are more confident than others and are actually ready to start taking some of those reins much earlier, and that's absolutely fine. The next thing that I'd like to draw your attention to, so in your attachments this week, you will see a copy of this. And it's simply to draw your attention to some dates, the foci, and where it is to be recorded. And we will always give you a gentle nudge prior to deadlines, because we know how busy you are and sometimes deadlines might slip. So in the first that we're going to look at this evening is that initial assessment of need, which we can see is due by the 27th of September for full-time trainees, or for part-time trainees, it's recommended. Now it says the end of October, but obviously as you get to know your trainee, it would be recommended that that be completed earlier. So we're going to have a look at what that form actually entails. And again, as we say, it has been sent out this week. So the upcoming form that will need to be completed, it's a one-page document, and the document has an assessment rating of 1 to 4. So 1 being exemplary and 4 being something of serious concerns. Under the umbrella, we'll look at the headings, attendance and punctuality. So what's that like for the trainee currently? Interpersonal skills, professional dress, organisation and initiative, and ethics and behaviour. So again, it's just simply a tick exercise. Where do you feel that your trainee currently is at? Mentors will also comment on the strengths and areas for development, and again, the subject knowledge, but that will be held in discussion with your trainee. So you can see the 3 boxes at the bottom. It asks for some strengths, areas for development, and subject knowledge. Now, secondary trainees can share the subject knowledge audits in mentor meetings so that you can see their current stage, where they're up to. Primary trainees obviously can discuss strengths and areas for development of the curriculum subjects covered at primary. So what they might feel most comfortable in, areas that they've got less experience in or they're not familiar with at all. Okay. The last thing I will note about the IAN form is that, yes, it should be completed by the mentor, but obviously as the trainee is interacting with other members of staff, it can be contributed to by other stakeholders, just via a little bit of discussion, perhaps, if there's a key member of staff that they've already been liaising with. Now, I mentioned earlier that your trainee is currently in the induction period of the course. So this is what, at the moment, what it could look like. This we know can be overwhelming at first for some, as schools are like incredibly busy places and there's quite a bit to take on board. So hopefully you've had the time to look through our programme that we've sent through to see the kind of the guidance notes for mentors and managing mentors on a weekly basis. The example of that is on the right hand side of the screen. So you'll see there's a column there for trainee notes and there's a column there for mentor notes. And those are guidance, what we could be looking at each week. And obviously for part-time trainees, some of this may take, as we say, twice as long due to the fact that they're not in school for the same quantity of time. So the general rule of thumb at this point, up until half term, is that the trainees must get to know the school, get to know the classes, and be introduced to key members of staff and year groups. They'll carry out some safeguarding training with us at the hub, and obviously your own safeguarding procedures held within school. We say that it's really, really important for anybody at any stage of teaching, the power of observation, and for trainees to observe different members of staff, but to go into a lesson, to observe it, but to have a key focus in mind. So for example, that might be the routines, how a teacher praises students, how the teacher questions pupils within lessons. We would say that they should carry out a minimum of 7 observations in each block. So the trainee to see, obviously yourself as the mentor, but other practitioners that you might want to signpost them to in school. And obviously that can take place at secondary in the free periods, or perhaps in PPA or professional development time. So there might be blocks of time away from the class where they're going to observe another colleague. We do encourage all trainees to become involved in one extracurricular club, obviously where this fits in with the school. It's also important that they do the shadow, a break duty or a playtime, and again, once per week for full-time and once fortnightly for part-time trainees, just so that they can see the routines, the procedures that are in place, and actually have that wider aspect of school life. Now, this period of time, although it's the induction and trainees may not be teaching, it is a gradual ease into teaching. So it might be purposeful that the trainee, under your direction, starts maybe delivering or working with small groups of pupils. They might be working on one-to-one. They might be delivering parts of lessons. It could be that perhaps in some schools, they might have the privilege of taking the register. So welcoming students in at the start of the day, taking that register as well. It's really powerful too, as we all know, that team teaching aspect. So as and when your trainee becomes more confident, having that safe environment, that net of safety there, where they can do a little bit of team teaching with yourself. The aim is to teach solo before October half term. And the reason we say that is after the October half term period, your trainee will be teaching whole class sessions. So it's better to prepare them and so that everybody knows exactly what they're doing.
Elaine, can I just jump in there? There was a question in the chat about what is meant by block. So just in relation to the minimum of 7 observations, I think, per block. So just to clarify, a block 1 would be up until Christmas. Block 2 is when they go to the alternate school. That would be their block B. And then they return to block A after they've done the block B, which is January through to March. And then they'd return April through to the end. So hopefully that's answered your question, Jenny. I can see that it has. Lovely. I'll pick up any questions as we move along. Thanks, Elaine.
Okay, thanks, Katie. So obviously within our own programme, so the curriculum strands that we cover through our programme, there's 6 strands in total, and these do feed into lesson observations. So it's what we look out for in trainee lessons, for example. They also feed into the reports at the end of the block. So you can see there at the top left-hand side of the screen, we've got the acronym S&C, for example, so subject and curriculum knowledge. So the list below that are the 6 strands that we focus on within our curriculum. Planned into the 23-24 curriculum are also 4 intensive training and practice episodes, and they total 20 days over the course of the year. And primarily that's just about putting theory and practice together. But we're going to have a little bit of a better look at that now. Okay, so here we go. We refer to this as the ITAP, so intensive training and practice, and the rationale really is about obviously following that theory and implementing a key skill within your placement school. Trainees can embed their learning by practicing what would happen in the classroom and then obviously receiving some feedback in that real time. The topics that ITAP will cover are foundational areas of learning and the key things that trainees need to know about and be able to do before they finish their training year. The National Institute of Teaching have selected 4 focus areas this year, which we feel will have the most impact on outcomes for trainees and students. Okay, so we've got that behaviour and relationships, which the trainees have been heavily involved in currently. We move on to that planning and teaching, so thinking about cognition. And again, moving on, autumn 2, assessment and responsive teaching, with a focus on questioning. And then finally, how learners learn. So that inclusive pedagogy and scaffolding. We'll notice that it obviously increases in complexity and moving on as the year progresses. So let's just move on to look at the expectations for your weekly interactions with trainees.
Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more about what a typical week would look like in just a moment, but I just want to kind of look with you what might the observation part of it look like. So you can see in front of you the template for the lesson observation. It's called the lesson observation pro forma. So these are both for mentors There is also one that exists for a managing mentor, and I'll just talk through some of the differences. So you'd have your key information at the top, your usual kind of information, the teacher, which teaching group it is, who the observer is, what the objectives are for that lesson, obviously the subject, what the topic is, and it's happening. And obviously that then helps the trainee and the mentor to kind of track progress over time. So you might be able to reflect on what's happening a month later and see what progress has been made. Out of those sections that Elaine's just walked us through, you can see there on the left-hand side, there's only 5 on this little snip, but you get a flavour of what it's like. So on this observation form, you can see that for each strand, the observer is being expected to just write a few really clear, concise bullet points that give the trainee some really specific, very, very honed in strengths. And you can see that's what being expected in this box. It's a very positive document. This is picking out all of the positives. We're building up the trainee. We're finding whatever the focus area is, and we're bullet pointing it. So you can see a worked example of this in the booklets that you've either got in front of you or have been emailed out. In the quick guides, there's a worked example for you, which just shows what the comments might be around. So for example, in the second strand down for planning and materials, it might be about, the trainee produced a really particularly brilliant lesson plan that week. Or if it's about forming good relationships and building up a rapport with class, that might fit into good professional behaviours. It's just a few bullet points that are needed, not a huge amount. So that's the kind of observation, the positives for the observation that need to be filled in. There's a slight difference, Elaine, if I can just ask you to move to the next slide for me. For anybody who's observing who isn't a mentor. So this form has a little bit of an addition. If you are a managing mentor, I know we've got some managing mentors on the call today. Also, if you're a subject lead, and we'll talk a little bit more about subject leads coming out, and also tutors who will introduce, via a slide in a moment. The difference with that part of the observation form is that they're asking you to look at some of the different elements, and some of the underpinning elements of this course are about that research and how research underpins the framework for this particular course, the core content framework. And National Institute of Teaching are very, very keen on the latest research into underpinning everything. So the trainees are well versed in those quotes and kind of that information coming through in their training sessions with us on a Thursday. So a visiting mentor or visiting managing mentor rather, or tutor might suggest a piece of reading. For example, if the trainee is being asked to think about assessment and questioning, they might say, for example, right, we want you to look up Doug Lamov, Google Doug Lamov, and find out what you can about no opt-out or cold call questioning. And it might be that somebody who isn't the mentor is able to just point them in a certain direction. So sometimes that different pair of eyes can just support them in a different way. And again, you can see a worked example of that in the quick guide. So just heads up for managing mentors, there's just a little bit more to that section. So we'll look now, Elaine, next slide, please, at what a typical week might look like. Okay, those of you familiar with mentoring in the past, there's lots of similarities. So we all know that there's no such thing as a typical week really in teaching, but as far as possible, we need to try and make mentoring a bit of a supportive cycle where the trainee can kind of know what to expect each week. And for that, we want to try and include some key elements. So having agreed an action step, so something that Elaine will talk you through a little bit more in the training, basically the area that we want the trainee to work on. They will then agree a part of the lesson that they'll come and have a look at. And that would be that first bullet point there. We're talking about up to 30 minutes. You as mentor or host teacher, whoever it is, going in and observing the trainee teaching that part of the lesson. Now, we are aware that sometimes it might need to be a little bit longer for you to significantly say that that trainee has, been successful in operating a certain type of questioning or supporting the students with some leading some learning. You might need to stay a little bit longer, but we say up to about 30 minutes. If it stretches beyond, don't worry too much about it. We would then hope for, after that observation, there to be a mentor meeting of around about an hour. Okay. Now we know that mentor meeting at certain times is going to be made up of different parts. So it might be that you just have for the first 5-10 minutes a little bit of a well-being check-in, a little bit of a cuppa. How's this week been? You'll get the biscuits out. How are you doing this week? How are you finding it? We know the pressures that ITTs have, And I think sometimes in a busy profession, it's easy to kind of overlook those basic kind of soft skills. So make sure that you're building that into the hour. Then you might, and Elaine will show you on the paperwork where there's kind of space to do those things. So within that mentor meeting, you'd leave up to about an hour. Then there'll be your other ad hoc chats that obviously happen, you know, asking you about resources, where they might find something. Can you just have a quick look at this lesson plan? We all know the kind of conversations that you might have with your trainee that kind of don't fit in within that hour. There'll be verbal feedback on the lesson portion. That might fall within the mentor meeting, but equally, if you've observed a trainee on a particular day, you might want to give a quick 5-10 minutes summary of what you've seen, just so the trainee isn't worrying about it if perhaps the mentor meeting doesn't fall until the next week. The immediacy of that feedback is quite important sometimes. Then as a mentor, you would provide some written feedback on the observation form provided. Again, we'll go through that. It's fortnightly for part-time, weekly for full-time. I think that was a question that was raised in the chat as well. The model for most things for part-time, is that you would do the same as everybody does in a week. So you would do the same things, but over a 2-week fortnight basis. And then you would review lesson plans and agree a turnaround time as well. Elaine, did you just want to add something there?
I did, yes, just answering a question in the chat. Yes, absolutely, you can use the observation performer before October half term.
Yeah.
I think as well, when documents are new, it's really good to get the hang of it, to get the grips, and to, you know, navigate your own way around it as well. But absolutely, yeah, there's nothing that has to be left to a certain time.
And I think in terms of reviewing those lesson plans, use your professional judgment. You might have worked providers in the past where they've stipulated it needs to be 48 hours. If you know that you can rely on your trainee to get it in with 24 hours notice, and that you've got a slot where you can happily talk through that lesson plan with them, and you're happy to agree 24 hours, that's fine. It might be something where you have a longer period of time initially, and then you reduce it as your trainee gains in confidence, and you know it's going to take you a little bit less time to kind of help them shape what they're going to be teaching. On the right of the slide there, you can just see some really nice little prompts. And within that kind of hour, that's the kind of things that you would be doing. So within that hour, that would hopefully be timetabled, but we do appreciate it's not always possible. But within that timetabled hour, you would talk through those pointers where you're going to praise their strengths. You're going to probe for those areas of development and decide what the action step would be. Set some really precise steps, some really precise actions. So you're really honing down to that granular level of what you want them to complete. Plan based on that with your trainee. Give them the opportunity to practice it, and we'll come to that next. And then obviously follow up on it and kind of decide to a time where you might go in and visit the trainee teaching that. Okay, thank you, Elaine. So something that some colleagues may be completely unfamiliar with is the new kind of practice of deliberate practice. So I know some schools are becoming quite fluent in this. There's some schools adopting this as whole school practice, but we want to just kind of give you a walkthrough of the importance of deliberate practice. And these are two of the things I mentioned, one of the two things that I mentioned earlier, that National Institute are exceptionally keen on. One is the research that underpins everything. And the second is this use of deliberate practice to support trainees. I've highlighted just some key phrases in there from Bambrick Santoyo. And it's just this idea that it's a core part of your mentor meetings. And it's about the trainee preparing and having the opportunity to prepare basically for that live game. So when you're in kind of a calm environment with your mentor, you've got the opportunity to plan things for when you're actually in the classroom and you're having to spin lots and lots of different plates. We all know how many demands there are once you get into those classrooms. And the eventual goal of that, obviously, is about improving those life chances for our young people. So just taking some inspiration from that quote there. If we have a look then about the types of practice, so it's not just any practice that we're looking for. It's not what we coin the phrase of Deans for Impact have used, naive practice. It's not about that repetition for repetition's sake with no clear guidance. It's not even just about purposeful practice where you do have a goal, it's more about the deliberate practice where you're focusing on something very, very specific in a specific field. So it relates specifically to the trainee's phase or specifically to the trainee's subject area. You are helping them to contextualize it. So, for example, if you're working on exit tickets on to do with stem cells and understanding stem cells, is that fit for purpose? Can you help them to make it very specific for their own particular classes? And you would tailor it specifically to the teacher that you are mentoring. So just some fundamentals of deliberate practice for those of you who haven't seen it before. Next slide, Elaine, please. Thank you. Just 5 principles. So deliberate practice, and I know it just to illustrate it a little bit further, it's about supporting the trainee. For those of you who haven't perhaps heard of it before, it is something I would say that comes a bit out of people's comfort zone. And we all know that the good CPD is that sometimes it's about making you feel a little bit uncomfortable because that pushes you into a zone where that learning happens. So that's what you as mentors need to be doing with your trainees, is getting them to push beyond their comfort zone so that they're really having that deeper thinking and they're questioning their practice in a much more detailed way. Working towards well-defined specific goals, and you will have agreed those goals as part of your mentor meetings, the same as you would in any sort of other mentor meeting that you might have held in the past. Focus intently on practice activities. So you actually give them an opportunity to practice it in a low stakes environment before they then take that away and work on it in the classroom. And receive and respond high quality feedback. So this is where your expertise as mentor is really going to support the development of your trainee, because they're going to take that feedback and you are going to, in the moment, as part of that mentor meeting, get them to kind of act on that and discuss how they're going to take that back into the lesson. And actually getting them to develop a mental model of their expertise. So as we've talked about, getting them to think about what does that mean for them, teaching their subject with that particular year group and whichever the lesson is that they're planning at that particular point. Okay, next slide then, Elaine, please. So to sum up, for those of you who've not heard much about deliberate practice before, it focuses on developing that expertise in a specific field. It allows the trainee teacher to develop that fluency because you're rehearsing before you're going live in front of pupils. So it almost frees up that working memory because you're not having to think about lots of different things while you're in the moment, in the heat of the classroom. You've had that opportunity to make those decisions in a much colder, more measured environment. And you're developing that fluency. So that reduces that cognitive overload so that the trainee can worry about who's arrived late or who needs a new exercise book or billing in the corners finished. So what extension activity are you going to set? So all of those kind of things that are going to happen in the moment. So 5 key principles really to deliberate practice: about identifying, preparing, practicing, feedback, and then getting the trainee to embed that back into their practice. Okay, any questions to pick up on deliberate practice in the chat, Elaine, before we move on? No, we're good?
No, we're absolutely
lovely. All right, thanks very much. So we're going to move on now to just having a look at assessment. Now, we've tried to simplify assessment for you. There's a lot to the course, and we're just trying to illustrate for you here kind of what your role would be as mentor, or if you're managing mentor joining the call today, what your role would be. So just to try and show you a little bit about the assessment that would happen throughout the year. In terms of the trainee in that middle column, their responsibility is collection of evidence for their e-portfolio, and they will know where to save documentation and they know which documents and what falls to them in terms of their responsibility. We cover that with them on a regular basis in their core training on a Thursday. Their responsibility is also, as we've talked about, to act upon feedback for their action steps. Your role in assessment as a mentor is to have that continual assessment via the feedback and that observation cycle. We would also ask you please to raise any concerns early. So sometimes if there's something, you're starting to see a little bit of a pattern, you might notice that you're giving feedback but the trainee really isn't acting upon it and it's becoming a bit of a recurrent picture. Then do raise that with us. We'll talk a little bit more about how you can do that and how you can use your trainees link tutor to do that. but please raise those concerns early so that we can put the correct kind of actions in place. You'll have the responsibility for setting what we call action steps. Those of you familiar with the early career framework as well, this will become a very, very familiar term. Action steps, essentially those very specific targets that you will set each week and then track the progress of, and Elaine will go through that very expertly shortly. The last thing that you have to do as a mentor is at 3 key termly reporting points, which are formal reporting points in November, March and June. Make judgments about whether the trainees are on trajectory or not on trajectory to meet the teaching standards. Okay, so that's your responsibility as mentor. Just so you're aware, because we know many of you like to know the whole picture, and so that you know where flashpoints where your trainees might become a little bit stressed and a little bit cognitively overloaded. There will be some external assessments that are set by the University of Birmingham, which are the awarding body for this course. And they have assignments that are set to 2 separate ones, a learning teaching assessment, which is split into 2 different parts. And there's a first deadline for that is 8th of November. And then the second part is the 22nd of November. So running up to that, you can imagine that the trainees will have some support for us in terms of planning for the assessments. And they'll also have support from National Institute with online async sessions. That doesn't mean that you can't have a chat with them. They might want to take 10-15 minutes of their mentor meeting to just discuss something through with you. And if there's the time for that, then absolutely fine. They would obviously welcome your professional opinion and support on that, but it is not compulsory, of course. And then there's a second assignment to do with assessing and planning for progression, and that doesn't fall until April 2024. Right at the end of the course, then, we as a panel, so there'll be us as course leads and some colleagues from National Institute of Teaching who will then make those final judgments at an assessment panel on whether the trainee have successfully passed. Along the bottom then you can see as managing mentors, so as well as sort of supporting your mentors and your trainees in your centres to kind of be working through those things, you'll have the role of QA in paperwork and observations as well, just to make sure that things are ticking on nicely, and we will be able to support you that as lead mentors.
Thank you, Katie.
Any questions there? There's a question from Rebecca. The external assessment dates, same for part-time students. They are, Rebecca, yeah, those dates are the same.
Thank you. Right, so I know the burning question for a lot of mentors. Obviously, you will have received a folder through this week from ourselves, and those are not electronic, but it's just so that you can see the kind of things in terms of formats, what they might look like. And in one of them, there is an Excel document, and it's called the Progress Tracker. Now, this is completely new to this particular year. This is the inaugural year. I would say that it should be accessed live by the trainee in their e-portfolio. Okay. Now, it can be completed and pre-saved on the actual version that you received. However, in order to reduce workload, so we're thinking about the trainee copying and pasting everything across, the live tracker saves everything automatically. Now, in terms of, we mentioned that the trainee should have 1 mentor meeting each week, or 1 per 2 weeks for part-time trainees. On the tracker, you will see some times, and these times, again, as Katie has mentioned, they are guidance. Some pockets might take longer than others, but please ensure that this takes place as the discussions form part of the trainee's evidence. Okay, we do ask trainees to complete this in and during the mentor meeting. Okay, so these are actual minutes and they're documented by the trainees during that discussions, and therefore we think it's really advisable to have that computer or laptop during the allocated time. So let's have a look at what this actually involves. Now, on the screen, I've got the blank section at the top and the completed section at the bottom. Now, the completed section, you should have already received that through. You will also see it in the quick guide to mentoring booklet that we emailed out to you as well. So you might want to have a browse round with it, have a look through that folder and kind of see what all these little tabs are about. But the first section is that check-in. Now, Katie said that, you know, sometimes we carry this out in the corridor with our trainees. We've already had one trainee who's just immediately started filling in the tracker and said, yeah, no problem. It is important. So this is a focus around the trainee's well-being. And if any additional support is needed for the trainee, so the mentor can contact the linked tutor if support is needed. So if there are points where they're struggling, or actually they feel that the workload's too much, is there something that we can put in place or that we can do? And it's to flag that to us as well. You will notice that it says lesson observation details. So this is the formal lesson observation that's been carried out on that week. So we've got the class, the date, and obviously the period or the time at primary. Okay, the completed example is at the bottom. And as again, I said, it's in that quick guide to mentoring. Okay, so the second, so I'm moving down through the document, and the second section on the progress tracker is the review. And this begins with the trainee articulating to you the key points from their training in the past week, both centre and school-based. Now, the example here in the white box shows at the bottom, shows a typical response. And I like to think of this as, so you've had training, now, so what? So what key points has the trainee taken from it? And if anyone is wondering how, you know, how will I as a mentor know what was taught on that Thursday, in that Thursday session, this will be, going forward, emailed on a Friday from us, okay? It is also available on the Teams tiles, and it's in the mentor and managing mentor section, but it will be emailed from us. Now the trainee can copy and paste the summary in, okay? The same thing happens again for part B, but it just focuses on subject knowledge development. So as we all know how important that is going forward within the teaching career. So secondary, perhaps this could be something from the subject audit. Is there something that's perhaps coming up? Primary trainees equally. So is there's something, a topic, a unit of work coming up that particularly that they want to discuss or they want to talk about? Scrolling on down then, we come to section C, and this brings us to the action steps review. Now, these action steps, as Katie has said, will be set each week. One relating to the theory sessions that have taken place on a Thursday. And again, as I said, those will be sent through. And the second relating to a school-based discussions. So, for example, an area of development from a lesson observation, if that has been carried out, perhaps. Just going to admit somebody into the room. So the National Institute of Teaching will send these out initially. So if you have not started carrying out lesson observations of the trainees, which at the minute we're not expecting that perhaps a lot of people will have done or have even started that, but the action steps can be sent out from the NIOT initially, and certainly ideas or options that you can put into those boxes. But as you begin to become familiar with your trainee, observe your trainee in lessons, you will be able to set these and personalize them moving forward. We appreciate that it takes a little bit of time just to become confident with documents that we know we're familiar with what to put in. So when first starting out, there will be no rollover. So at the top box, we can see it says rollover action steps. To begin with, there's absolutely nothing. You'll see at the bottom of the screen, there is a completed version. Okay, and this particular trainee met the previous action steps. We would always say if a trainee has a rollover, so something from the previous week, and they're acting upon it, that's absolutely fine. But if they're, and it hasn't been met yet, but they're still working on it, that's fine. If they're not acting on it, it could be that a support plan is needed. Okay, and we would obviously discuss that on a one-to-one and needs basis. Underneath that, the centre-based action step, and again, this is where we say it will be sent out weekly on a Friday via an email to the trainee and to yourselves, the mentors. Okay, so you know exactly what to put into that box and the rollover action steps as well. And then the final part of the review section allows for what Katie has mentioned, that kind of praise and probe process before we're ending with that opportunity devoted to deliberate practice. In terms of the praise, we like to think of what worked well. So what do we want to kind of highlight from the trainees' progress this week, from the lesson observations, things that we've noticed? It can be that the trainee feeds into this in terms of what they felt, if you are agreeable, what worked well really this week. In terms of the probe section then, that would be the even better if. Okay, so it might be a discussion around perhaps such and such, whatever it might be. So you notice that when the primary, for example, when the students move from the carpet to the tables to begin their work, there seemed to be an increase in noise. Students were off task. So it might be, what could we do about that? And this then feeds into that deliberate practice. So as Katie has mentioned, so we've picked up on something that we think, right, we need to fine tune this, we need to work on it. What could it look like? And it's about giving this coaching opportunity for trainees. Because I think historically, if we just completely put into a box, we need to work on behaviour management, but actually it's that granular approach. What specifically about the behaviour management do I need to work on? Okay, because there's lots of different elements. What is it and what do I need to do? What does it look like? So it might be that you sit down uncomfortable perhaps to begin with, but you might have, you might script out an example, a comment that the trainee might give to the students in a lesson. It might be that you model what that could look like. Okay, and we also feel that within deliberate practice, it's a good point, which we'll look at next, to direct the trainee to, oh, I'd like you to come and watch X, Y, and Z tomorrow, or why don't you pop into my lesson and observe how I get the students or the pupils to do that. Okay, so the final section, so I've moved down a little bit on the Excel document, is called Planning Ahead, and it's broken down into 3 parts. And we like to think of this just as a summary, because obviously there's been a lot of discussion that's taken place, and these are the key points just to remember for next week. Part A is just the chance to consolidate and be really clear with the trainee what their action steps are. So when they leave the meeting, what are you doing next week? So what's the action steps? And again, as we mentioned, there might be a rollover. If not, you put not applicable. Again, these documents, you can add additional rows if needed. The second part is the centre step action plan, which again, and I keep repeating myself, it will be sent to you weekly, and it just needs copying and pasting across by the trainee. Okay, we move into the part B of this section, and this is the review of subject knowledge. So again, for a secondary trainee, it might be referring back to the subject knowledge audits, or primary and even secondary, it might be thinking of planning and teaching units that are actually coming up. Okay, so units that, oh, I've not read this book, or I'm not familiar with how to add fractions, or whatever it might be pertinent to things that are coming up potentially in the next couple of weeks for the trainee. And then the final row is part C, and that's directing a trainee. Okay, when we talk about being very clear and consistent, for example, who are they going to observe or shadow, but always with a really clear focus as well. So next week, you'll go and see Miss Jones teaching maths with year 7. Okay, so the weekly tab becomes a significant part of the trainees' evidence for their QTS, and therefore it's in the trainees' interest to have this open, to have the relevant sections filled, copied, pasted across, and for the discussion then to take place between the mentor and the trainee. Okay, and then just the final thing that I do want to mention. So on the Excel document, there is a tab called Teaching Standard 8 and Part 2. And this is just about making you aware of it at this point. But the trainees should be adding their evidence of any training relating to Teaching Standard 8. So this professional responsibilities and behaviours. We have populated some of the rows already in it. So you can see at the top part in a kind of a green-blue section. So it might be anything additional that they feel that they've carried out or they've been part of, some training perhaps that has taken place in school. And again, at the end of that, there's just the mentor initials. So we will also, myself, Katie, Sue and Mark, we will also go through these and add our initials to anything that we feel, actually, I've seen that, or I know that they've read this, they've shown it to me. So we're just signing it off, if you like. And at the bottom is a checklist, and it's just to be aware of it now, but it's to be completed at the end of each half term. Okay, so your link tutor will help with any questions you have relating to this progress tracker on their checking in with you and during their visits as well. What I would say is to go into that folder, have a browse through it, have a play around, see what the sections are about. There is a tab on how to use the tracker. There is a glossary of terms tab. The progress overview and lesson observation tally tabs that are also on it are purely the trainee's responsibility. Okay, so you'll be looking at the weeks, and that will be your kind of your discussion points during your mentor meetings as well. Okay, but as I said, your link tutor will help with any questions that you've got during their visits as well. Katie.
Thank you. Just to pick up, I think we answered most questions. There was a couple of questions in the chat, Elaine, but I think we've managed to answer most of those as we've gone along. What I will just stress, as Elaine said, is that your trainee will have a link tutor. So link tutors have got multiple different roles within the course, but each trainee is being assigned one of these 4 faces, one of these people here. So you've met Elaine and myself, for those of you who have not met us before. We've also got Mark Foster and Sue Marsh, and they weren't able to join us today, but they were also link tutors. Sue's specialty is DT and Mark's specialty is history, so they are their subject-specific domains as well. Each trainee, no matter what their subject is been assigned a link tutor. So they are their first port of call. Okay, if there are any issues, we should be the first person that they get in touch with. And each trainee knows who their link tutor is. So if there's an issue raised and you can ask them as mentor, who's your link tutor? You can have our email address as well. All those things, we've got that whole chain of communication available for you. But if there's an issue, we should be the first port of call. We will also come out and we'll QA each block. So each of those kind of placements within the year, we'll come out and QA each one to make sure that the trainee's making the progress that they need to make. And we'll also make sure that we come out and visit and observe the trainee. If needs be, and it's not a subject area that we're familiar with, we might bring in a subject specialist if you've raised any subject knowledge concerns through the paperwork. But there's also the support of us coming out and visiting and observing lessons as well. And also the well-being side of it. We talked about, their general sort of progress and that kind of well-being and checking in. We know the importance of looking after trainees' mental well-being and their mental health and how demanding the year can be. So as we've said, try to build in those cuppa and a biscuit at the start of each mentor meeting to just check in they're okay. We will be doing the same as link tutors. So before half term, you can expect an email coming through, probably via the trainee. And then in relation with you, just having a little bit of a chat just to check in. How are they settling in? How are things? Is there anything we need to be aware of? Is there anything we need to do to support? So those meetings will be being organised before half term via the trainee. We will also organise the observations via the trainee as well. So we'll offer kind of slots and look at their timetables, which they'll upload to their e-portfolio, and then arrange an agreed mutually convenient time with the trainee and yourself, and come out and visit and see them in situ and see where the magic happens. Okay, so last bit of information is just to do with all of the information that there is available to you. So I would say at the moment you are probably feeling a little overwhelmed by the amount of information and the new paperwork. Believe me, Elaine and I and Sue and Mark have been on exactly the same journey. It's always the same when it's a new course. We are getting to grips with it now, so we're hoping that very quickly you will too. It is quite intuitive. It does all kind of knit together. Things have got different names to what we might have been used to if we've mentored in the past, but we will all get there together. So just to explain, there's a few different sources of where you can find information. So you've obviously got your team's tile that you should have got access to. So you should hopefully have been able to have that information sent out to you. If we can just ask if you can either email the TIE email address, okay? If there's any problems with you having that access, those emails should have come out this week. So hopefully you now have got your National Institute of Teaching login, which will then give you your access to the Teams tile, which has got all of this information on. Just in case it hasn't, we've also set up these partnership support pages, one for primary and one for secondary, so you can find all the relevant documentation on there as well. And the trainees also have access to a lot of the information via their Trinity Institute of Education SharePoint. So there's a lot of duplication of things in places. But I think the question was raised earlier in the chat, where's the most important place to actually store things? And that's in the trainees e-portfolio, which is via the National Institute of Teaching. That's where the tracker that Elaine's just shown you, and that's the place where everything needs to be saved live if possible, so that you aren't duplicating out on work there. Lots to get your head around. We will, as we've said, send out weekly reminders, regular reminders of kind of the focus area, what training the trainees have been taking part in their core training. We're going to trial those weekly emails first. It might be that they're kind of no longer necessary by the time we're all in the swing of things, but we're going to make sure that they are available. At key points throughout the year when there might be further support for filling in, for example, the progress reports, the termly progress reports, at the end of each term, apologies, we will do like a little voiceover video that just guides you through that. And we're also going to run, I'm going to lead on some managing, mentor and mentor optional drop-in meetings, which watch out for those details coming through. That'll just be the opportunity for people to drop in, very short meeting, just ask any questions. That doesn't mean you can't contact us at any point to ask any questions. Okay, we are here to support you in whatever way is needed.
Yeah.
Couple of questions, Elaine.
A few questions there. So if, for example, if you are a non-specialist and your trainee is in a subject that maybe it is not your specialism, absolutely you can carry out the observations. Obviously teaching is the craft, is the skill, and it crosses between all of the different subjects. But if there's anything pertinent in terms of subject knowledge, that it might be an idea, if you are carrying out the observations, that you have that check-in with the teacher that's in the room as well. So you can do that. Obviously, you can also contact another member of staff to carry out an observation. Sometimes it's nice to have a fresh pair of eyes as well, and then just have that discussion or that feedback together, perhaps. Okay. I think there was another question.
Yeah, further question from Sophie, Elaine. Is the SharePoint where we log our mentor training?
Log on mentor training. The SharePoint, so it's logged, or you go into it via your NIOT email, and yes, it's within their SharePoint. Absolutely, it is. Also, the trainee can access that. So the trainee can go in, they can have it opened as well. So, you know, the trainee can have the vast majority of it done or actioning it during the mentor meeting. As I say, it can be done on the Excel document that we did send out to you, but it would just mean, you know, after school hours, then the trainee would then have to start copying and pasting it all across. But obviously at the start, just have a look at our version just to find your own feet with it. But yes, it is in the NIOT SharePoint section.
It might be worth kind of sitting with your mentee at your computer, perhaps in a room where you've got an appropriate kind of venue to have your mentor meeting, get them to log on